Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We'll just give everybody a couple of seconds to come in. If you notice that my gaze is shifting from one side to the other, it is because we have a multiple camera situation going on here. So we can be live on both Instagram and Facebook at the same time. So we'll give a couple seconds. People are starting to join in. So happy that you're here joining us today. Today is March 20th. Today we are relaunching my book, Awakening the Lightwarrior Within. Published this book a year and a half ago, and we are currently in the process of doing a relaunch, a digital relaunch. As of today, the ebook is available everywhere. It is available on Apple iBooks. It is available on Kobo. Is available in the UK, in the US, worldwide. So if you're looking for a copy of the book, if you don't have one yet, and you were looking to get the ebook, it is now finally available. The audiobook will be forthcoming in the coming days, hopefully, if not in the coming week. Everything has been submitted to Audible, so that will be live on Audible shortly. We're just waiting for an update on their catalog, so stay tuned with us, and I'll keep you guys posted as to when that is available, so that you guys can go ahead and grab a copy if you don't already have one. I wanted to take a moment this morning before we jump into our talk, before we start talking about radical acceptance, just to acknowledge and honor everything that is going on in the world right now. We are seeing a rise over the past year in violence and hate crimes against the Jewish community. We're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. We're seeing a rise in hate crimes against the LGBT community, against the trans community. We're seeing a rise in crimes against Black lives and people of color. In the past week, we've been seeing hate crimes against the Asian community. So I want us to take a moment and acknowledge that and hold space for that. I think it would be really irresponsible to come here today and not talk about what's going on in the world. I think there's a very common notion in the spiritual community, which is spiritual bypassing, where we don't look at anything that is negative. We pretend that it isn't there, and it is of service to no one to deny that these events are going on in the world. So I'd like us just to take a moment today before we get started, before we start talking about radical acceptance, just to hold space for that. We'll start with a small prayer. We'll do an excerpt of the Shantideva prayer, just to hold space for everything that has been going on in the world. If you are in a place where you can close your eyes, go ahead and do so. If you're driving, if you're on the road, if you're doing anything that requires your full focus, please, by all means, keep your eyes opened. We don't want any accidents. Just keep your eyes open. Just send out your intention, send out your prayer. If you know the prayer, you can recite it with me. If you don't, you can just follow along, just hold space in your heart and send out your intentions. So we'll start with a deep breath in through the nose and out through the nose. Just getting grounded in our bodies. And we'll recite the Shantideva prayer. May I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all those who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitudes of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky, until all beings, everywhere are freed from sorrow, and all are awakened. And so it is, and so it shall be. Let's just take another deep breath, holding some space for everything that is going on in the world right now. And we'll dive in. So I want to start with a story. If you've read the book, you know this story. It's the first time that I talk about it live on camera. The day was February 23rd, 2012. I had just come home from work. I had changed out of my work clothes and put down my bag, grabbed the dog, put her on her leash, brought her down for a walk. And as I was coming back in, I decided to check the mail, bring it up to our condo. We were living in the city. This was 2012. I was with my former husband at the time. living in a condo in downtown Montreal. And as I was going through the mail, as I was checking the mail, I came across a statement from the electrical company. And it was one of those moments where you receive an envelope and you know that it's not your typical monthly statement. It's not your typical monthly bill. The logo is the same, but the envelope is different. And right away, you know that this is not good news. Or at least if you've lived my life, you know that these are not good news when you get these types of envelopes. So I grabbed the envelope and I opened it quickly, reading through it, discovering that we hadn't paid our electrical bill in over 6 months. And that if the account wasn't rectified and put up to date within the following 10 days, our electricity would be suspended. And this was February. It's a fairly cold month in Montreal, for those who know. It's not a great time to go without electricity or without heating. In my rage, let's call it what it is, in my rage, I picked up the phone to call my former husband and just drill into him. He had taken over the finances a few years prior, just because I was dealing with so many other things around the house and the finances always stressed me out. So he had decided to take over the finances. And all of the bills, all of the statements would all go directly to his email so that I wouldn't see them. So it was very rare that we actually got any bills or any types of letters directly in the mail. Normally when we did, it was because something was wrong. I'll just get a little bit closer and talk a little bit louder, just to make sure that you guys can hear me well. So I picked up the phone and I called my former husband to let into him, explaining to him what had happened. And he was out with a friend. He tried to reassure me that, he would take care of it and don't worry, everything will be fine. I'll take care of it when I get home. And in my frustration, in my rage, I just, it's fine. I'll take care of it myself, and hung up the phone, and went and reached for his iPad, which was, where he got all of his emails so that I could look through his emails and find our account statement. Because the letter that we received, despite asking for a rectification of the account, didn't actually include the amount that was past due. So I went through his emails looking for that account statement so that I could see exactly what the amount was that was past due, and transfer that and pay that bill electronically online so that we wouldn't get our electricity cut from us. And as I was going through the emails looking for that electrical bill or that electrical statement, I saw an email come in with an invoice for a flower delivery. And immediately thought to myself, oh, how nice. It was February 23rd. It was our 6-year anniversary of being together. It was the anniversary of our first date. And I thought, oh, how nice to send flowers. Except it was 6 o'clock at night and I hadn't received any flowers. So I looked at the invoice again and glanced down at it to see exactly where these were being delivered. Had they gone to my office? Were they coming to the house? Only to discover that they were being sent to somebody else entirely. They were being sent to a man in Mexico that I had never heard of before. It was a name that was not familiar to me, that I did not recognize. And there were instructions on the invoice to include a personal note with those flowers. And the note was in Spanish, but roughly translated said, "You are the owner of my heart, and I will fight for you." I felt a sinking sensation in the pit of my stomach. I immediately knew what had been going on. There had been red flags over the years that there were troubles and there were problems in my relationship. But this was the first instance of infidelity, or at least emotional cheating, based on the fact that I didn't know much yet. So I decided to do what anyone does now in the age of technology and investigate further, going onto Facebook, trying to figure out who this man was. I had never heard this name before. It definitely wasn't, a friend or a common acquaintance that we had. And trying to understand exactly what was going on. Was I making up stories in my head, or was there something that was really happening here that I just had not been aware of? And as I went onto Facebook and looked through Facebook messages, I came to realize and I came to understand that they had met 6 months prior, when my former husband was in Mexico attending a wedding. They had met at the hotel and spent most of the night in the hotel lobby, talking and getting to know each other before going up to one of their hotel rooms where they spent the night together. And the messages continued over those 6 months with daily messages of wishing each other good morning and wishing each other good night and love notes and confiding in each other. Basically all of the things that you would say to, a new crush or a budding love, of, how you had never felt anything like this before, and how you could not confide in anybody else the way that they had been confiding in each other. And so in my desperation, I picked up the phone again to call my husband. He answered, somewhat annoyed that I was disrupting his night for a second time, until he heard my voice, and until he heard the quiver in my voice. And he immediately knew that something was wrong. I asked him to come home immediately, that we needed to talk. And he did. He hung up the phone. He headed straight home, so that we could talk about it. And that was the night that everything began to change. Like I said, there had been instances or red flags in my marriage prior to that, but there had never been anything like this. There had never been proof or any actual instances of infidelity. And so the usual played out for anybody who's dealt with infidelity or has dealt with this type of situation. You probably know the drill. He came home and he begged me to stay, explaining that it was nothing, that it didn't mean anything, they weren't in love, and that he had been trying to break it off for some time but didn't want to hurt anybody, and that this was a wake-up call for him to everything that was at stake and what he could lose, and just begging me to stay. And I did stay. I stayed for another 4 years in that marriage, part of my desperation was the fact that a few weeks prior to this happening, we had just signed the sales order or the sales acknowledgement to purchase a house together in the suburbs, and had already given a deposit, and there was no way to back out of that. And he just, he kept promising that things would be different now, that this was a wake-up call for him. And so I stayed for another 4 years, just hitting rock bottom over and over and over again, until rock bottom really became just more of a comfortable resting place. It was just something I had become accustomed to, because I kept telling myself that as long as I stayed down, I couldn't get hurt anymore, or at least he wouldn't be able to hurt me any more than he already had. And so I stayed. And you might be wondering what this story, has to do with radical acceptance. The underlying theme here is really that my self-worth was embedded in that relationship. It was embedded in that marriage. I had taken my self-worth and I had woven it into everything that we had built together. I had spent my entire life doing things exactly the way society had told me they should be. We had met 6 years prior. We had dated. After a year, we had gotten engaged. We had gotten married, had a beautiful wedding in a big church with both of our families present. We had, bought our first home, which was a condo in the city, which eventually we sold to buy the house that, I was just talking about out in the suburbs with, the picket fence and the extra room so that we could, build a family together and grow together. And so I had done everything right, and I had spent my entire life trying to make my life look picture perfect, because that is what society had told me was acceptable. And that's what I believed would cause me to be worthy. That's where my self-worth came from, my validation came from. I was looking to get my validation from my marriage, from my relationship, from the status I had built, from the home that I had built and I had decorated and I had put so much time and sweat into. And where we get our self-worth, where we choose to look for validation, is very much important when we start to talk about radical acceptance. Because it is the underlying thread. They are so tightly interconnected that you really can't talk about one without talking about the other. So I want to talk to you today about radical acceptance, about where we sit and where our resistance lies and how we can move out of that and really step into the light and the fullness of our worth and our wholeness. But before that, I want to take a moment and read from the book, from page 62, if anybody has it and wants to follow along. We'll just read a quick paragraph from it, which I believe really sets the tone for everything that we're going to be talking about today. So this is on page 62 from the chapter on radical acceptance. The journey to radical acceptance isn't always an easy one. Mostly this is because we have developed so much resistance to who we are based on who we think we should be and who the world tells us we should be. Do you remember who you were before you started to take on the roles and personas that society dictated? Maybe it wasn't society. Maybe it came from within your family. We're constantly bombarded with ideals of who we need to be. We take these on because we believe these will in effect cause us to be worthy of love, of belonging, of connection, worthy of taking up space. So I'll stop there, but I wanted to read that because the resistance that we feel when we talk about acceptance is really the first mechanic in trying to unravel radical acceptance and really get beneath it so we can understand really what's lying beneath the surface. Our resistance is born of our ego. And the ego, if you're not familiar with it, is a term from A Course in Miracles. I've talked about it before in many blog posts and in the book. Our ego is our fear-based mind. It is the wounded inner child. It is our fear. It is all of the mad ideas that we tell ourselves about who we are and, what is at stake, what we have to lose. Our ego, our resistance is designed to keep us safe. And sorry, I'm reading the notes, and if anybody's having trouble hearing on Facebook, I'm not sure why. We do have our external microphone plugged in, but there does seem to be better sound on Instagram. If anybody is struggling on Facebook and you want to hop on over to Instagram, I think we have some better sound here. So our resistance, it's born of the ego, and there's two sides to resistance. There's the change and there's acceptance. What I want to talk about today is really where our resistance lies. What is the texture of it? When you think about things in your life that you believe need to change or need to be different, need to look differently, whether it be your relationships, your social life, your career, your home, or even your body. I think we all have a lot of resistance right now with regards to our bodies, based on where we are in this pandemic. The world has been shut down for the better part of a year. We've been in isolation. We've become estranged from our families and our loved ones as we isolate inside our homes. And I think that's having a really big impact on all of us, on our mental health and on our physical health and well-being as well. So I want you to take a minute to think about, where does your resistance lie? What is it in your life that you wish looked differently? Where is that desire for change? And what is the texture of your resistance? So like I was saying, our resistance is born of our ego. It's born of our fear-based mind. What is your resistance telling you is at stake if things did not change? If you were to, let's talk about body for today, just because I think, so many of us have struggled with this, myself included. I spent most of my life struggling with body image, and definitely being confined during the pandemic has brought those issues back up to the surface. For those who don't know, a year and a half ago when we released the hardcover copy of this book, the plan was to do, a full-on book launch and a tour so that we could spread the word of the book. And a few weeks after the book launch itself, I became a parent, welcoming a baby boy into our family. And that, monopolized all of my time, as it should. Priorities shifted, and that was the right shift to take place. But suddenly, I was giving up my time in order to take care of this child and to nurture this child and provide for their well-being, which meant I didn't have time anymore to go to the gym or to exercise or do the things that I was doing before. And that was okay, and I was okay with that. But it did cause a lot of those body image issues to resurface as I couldn't take care of myself the way I had in the past. And then about 3 months into, that new journey of parenthood, of fatherhood, the pandemic started. Exactly the week after I had, decided to return back to the gym, things were finally a little bit more stable at home. We had gotten into a routine, and I was finally able to take a couple mornings off during the week where I would be able to go to the gym and actually exercise and work out. And I think I got 3 workouts in before the announcement came that all gyms and all establishments would be closed because of the pandemic. And, as most of us know, they stayed closed for the better part of a year and are only now just starting to reopen. So during that time, it wasn't possible for me to go out and exercise and do the things that I had normally done at the frequency and at the intensity that I had been doing them. I know a lot of us have become accustomed to trying to work out from home and, trying to maintain our health and our well-being, as best as we can. But this pandemic has placed a lot of strain on us, and it's placed a lot of strain on our bodies. And I think we need to soften in terms of our expectations and how we look at ourselves, and how we treat ourselves, because we've just been, we're surviving this pandemic. It's not something that we are trying to excel during. Right now, we're just trying to take care of ourselves and take care of each other so that we can make it to the other side of this. So I know for a lot of us, our bodies have suffered. We've put on a few extra pounds, and it's hard because for a lot of us, we attach our self-worth to the number on the scale, to the size of clothes that we wear, to the way we look at ourselves, in the mirror, and the way we see ourselves, the way we think, we appear to others, the way we perceive our desirability and our attractiveness. So I think a lot of us are suffering with our bodies right now. And so I'll keep that as kind of a main theme for today's talk. So I want you to take a minute and think about, your resistance. Where does it lie? Where does it live within your body? When you think about things that you wished looked differently or wished that you could change, if it was your body and losing weight, or maybe it's your relationship, or maybe it's your career, whatever it may be, where does that resistance sit in your body? Do you feel that tension in your chest? Do you feel a heaviness on your shoulders? Where does it live within your body? What is the texture of that resistance? And I think it's really important to understand what the texture of that resistance is, because as we do the work, as we meditate, as we love on ourselves, as we take in those moments of stillness where we can practice radical acceptance, the resistance isn't going to go away entirely, just like the ego will never go away entirely. For as long as we are here, the ego will be there, the resistance will be there, it will constantly creep back in. But understanding the texture of that resistance, understanding what it feels like in your body so that you can better recognize it when it does start to creep back in and come back to the surface, so that you know where the care, where the love is needed. So I'm seeing some comments that, yes, we need to be kind and gentle with ourselves. Some of us carry it in our shoulders. I can say that for myself. I often feel my resistance in my chest. I feel like a tightening in my chest. I feel the anxiety of it. So it's really important to understand where we feel the resistance. Where does it lie? What is the texture to it? And then it's important to ask ourselves, what is our resistance trying to keep us safe from? Because the resistance, like the ego, is not there to be evil. We talk about the ego in such a negative way, but its motives aren't bad. Its motives are to try and keep us safe. They're to try to keep us comfortable and within our comfort zone. And our resistance is very much the same. Your resistance is trying to keep you safe. So what is your resistance telling you is at stake? If you were to accept your body the way it is, if you weren't to change, if you weren't to lose the weight, what is at stake? Is it that you would no longer be desirable? Is it that, your partner, your spouse would no longer find you attractive? Is it, if you're single, you won't be able to find anyone or meet someone? Is it that, your partner, your spouse might leave? We have all of these stories that we build up, that we tell ourselves of what we will lose or what is at stake if we don't change if we don't conform to what we think is good and acceptable, what will cause us to be worthy or cause us to be valid or worthy of love and connection and belonging. So it's really important to understand what is the texture of that resistance and what is lying underneath it. What is it telling you is at stake? Because very often those things that it is telling you are at stake are really the deeper desires that you have within your being. Those desires just to be seen and to be loved and to be desired and to be appreciated. We mask those with these superficial desires of what we believe is at stake if we don't conform, if we don't change. So asking ourselves, what is our resistance trying to tell us? Sitting with it, understanding the texture to it, the heaviness to it, and where your fear is starting to creep in. You know, our resistance, it tries to keep us from accepting our current reality. And the reason acceptance is so important is because on the opposite side of acceptance, on the opposite of the spectrum, is denial. When we deny, when we live in our denial, when we live in our ego, we are denying our reality. We are telling ourselves it doesn't exist. We are living in illusions that we are creating. Living in our denial, you know, the best analogy that I can try to give to you is, you know, living in your denial is like trying to drink from a cup. It's like you're thirsty and you want to drink for a cup, but your ego, your mind is telling you that that cup doesn't exist. So it is very hard to manipulate, or not even manipulate, but change and transform and grow when you're living in your denial and you're not acknowledging and accepting the reality of where you are right now in your life. And that's why radical acceptance is fundamental. It is the foundation, because it is the only way that we can get to where we want to go. It is the only way that we can begin to change and to transform, and to build the lives that we want for ourselves. You know, we often stay stuck in our resistance and in our denial because we believe that accepting our body the way it is, accepting our relationship the way it is, our life, our career, our social environment, our social lives, if we were to accept it the way it is, it would cause our self-worth to diminish. In fact, it's the opposite. When we live in our denial, we become separate from ourselves, we become detached. And the more detached we become from ourselves, the more we live in our ego and in our denial, the more we lose touch with our self-worth. Our self-worth is very much inherent. It is part of all of us. It is always there. It is always present. You can't actually diminish it. You are always worthy. You know, as a child of God, as a child of the universe, whatever you choose to call it, the semantics really aren't important. You will always be worthy. You will always be worthy of being here, of taking up space, of being loved, of worthy of connection, worthy of feeling like you belong. That never goes away. What does happen is that we become so rooted in our denial, so rooted in our ego, that we distance ourselves from our actual worth and we forget that it's there. It never actually diminishes, it's always there. But we create this paradox of where we separate from our wholeness, our holiness, our divinity, our light, and ultimately from our worth. We separate ourselves from it. And the act of acceptance is really just bringing the two sides back together. It's reconnecting with our wholeness. It's reconnecting with our holiness, our divinity, our light, our worth. So that's why radical acceptance is so important, and it is so fundamental, because we need to acknowledge how things are. We need to acknowledge where we are right now in our lives in order to understand what it is that we really want to change, what it is that we really wish would transform. A Course in Miracles says, God did not create a meaningless world, and that we have no neutral thoughts. So everything that we look at, whether it be our bodies, whether it be our careers at work, our circumstances, our situations in our marriage, we assign the meaning to those. We assign the value and the worth. We are the ones who determine whether those are good, bad, acceptable, unacceptable, whether they cause us to be worthy or unworthy. And that is because we have gotten so accustomed to being separate from ourselves. We have become so accustomed to living in our ego, to living in our denial, that we no longer see through the eyes of the divine. We no longer see through our light. We no longer see through our holiness. Instead, we see through our fear-based mind. And because God or the universe, whatever you want to call it, did not create a meaningless world, if we cannot see the meaning that it has created, we assign meaning ourselves, and we decide what is good and what is bad. And the reason this is important, the reason I want to talk about this, is because we set these objectives for ourselves. We set these goals for ourselves that will cause us to become worthy, that will cause us to become worthy of love, of belonging, of connection when we get there. So we will be worthy of love. We will be worthy of belonging when we get to the number on the scale, when we fit into the certain pair of jeans, when we get the job, when we get the house, when we get the guy, when we get the girl. That's when we'll be happy. That's when we'll be worthy of love. That's when we'll be worthy of belonging here and taking up space. But the desires that we are after, the destination has to reflect the journey. What I mean by that is it has to hold the same ingredients. What you want to achieve, what you want to feel when you do get to those desired outcomes, you have to find ways in every single moment to bring out those feelings. And it's hard, it's not easy. There are days that this will very much be a struggle, but that is the mature side of acceptance. Acceptance is not about saying, oh, well, it is what it is. Nothing's ever going to change, so I'm just not going to do anything. That's the immature side of acceptance. The mature side of acceptance is saying, I acknowledge where I am. I hold reverence for where I am and where I've come. And now that I acknowledge, now that I accept my reality, now that I accept where I am in my body, in my life, in my relationship, I can start to decide what needs to change, what needs to look differently. And when we do that, we have to remember that wherever it is that we want to go, whatever it is that you want to attain, you have to bring in those feelings, those desires into the present moment. The journey needs to look like the destination. You can't hate your body on the way to loving it. You can't punish your body on the way to loving it and feeling beautiful. You can't live in lack on your way to abundance. You can't abuse and deprive your body on the way to health and vibrancy. You can't punish your way to joy and peace. We can't withhold love on our way to being loving and loved. The journey needs to have the same ingredients as the outcome, as the desire, as the destination for this to work. Otherwise, we'll never get there. When we do get the guy, when we do get the girl, when we do get, the job, the house, the boat, the car, whatever it is that you're looking for, you'll realize that it wasn't actually that you were looking for. It wasn't actually that's going to fill the hole or the void that you feel inside you. Because that void, that lack of self-worth can only be filled internally. It can only come from the inside out. There is nothing outside of you that will make you be worthy, that will cause you to be worthy, that will validate you. Instead, we need to look for that internally. And the way we do that is by making the journey the same as the destination, making it look and feel the exact same way. And there are days where this will be very hard. If you're struggling right now with your body because, like me, I'm in the same situation. I've put on a few pounds since the pandemic started. There are days where that feels very much like a struggle, and you need to look for the small things in those moments. Some days it will be a struggle to look in the mirror and say, I love my body and I love the way I look. Some days the only thing that you will love about yourself is going to be the color of your eyes, or the way you were able to do your hair that morning. But it is those little moments of acceptance, those little moments of self-love that multiply, they compound each other. And in those little moments of self-love and self-joy, we soften, and we're able to reach a little bit further and grab onto the next one, and the next one, and the next one, until they start to compound themselves and become a catalyst for the change that we want in our lives. So that's why acceptance is so important. It is the reason, it is the only way that we can get ourselves to change, or to bring in the change that we want into our lives. And again, it's not about these changes making us worthy or validating us, because they won't. It's about bringing ourselves back to our center, back to our light, back to our wholeness. It is in these moments that we get to decide what it is that really needs to change. At the beginning, I talked about, our acceptance and our resistance, and how there's two sides to it. There is acceptance and there is change. We get to decide which of those two sides of the coin we are going to play with, whether or not things really need to change, or whether or not we just need to accept them as they are. And, that brings me to the third mechanic, which is seeing the light. There is a passage in A Course in Miracles, it's lesson 61, that says, I am the light of the world. This is not a lesson to be learned. It is a statement of truth. It's not an opportunity for glorification or for inflating our egos. It's actually a moment of really deep humility. Because when we acknowledge, when we recognize, when we remember that we are the light of the world, it means that I am the light of the world and you are the light of the world. And my neighbor is the light of the world. And even that colleague at the office that I don't very much agree with or that I don't really like, they are the light of the world as well. Whether they acknowledge it or recognize it, that is for them, and that is their journey, and that is part of their process and why they are here to grow and learn and evolve. But it is a moment of deep humility to understand that we are all the light of the world. We are the light of God. There is a divine spark that exists within us that cannot be extinguished because it is not of us. We did not create it. That spark, that divine light is what connects us to each other. And if we were to take for a moment the opportunity to connect to that light, and to look at ourselves through the eyes of the divine, through the eyes of our holiness, through the eyes of God, if that's a word that resonates with you, the question becomes, this thing that I'm struggling so much with, whether it be my body or the extra pounds, or my relationship not looking the way it needs to or the way I want it to, or my career or my house or whatever it is, this thing that I am struggling so much with, if I were to look at this through the light, if I were to see it through the light, see it through the eyes of the divine, see it through my wholeness and my divinity, would it really need to change? Because I'll tell you that you were created perfectly. There is nothing about you that needs to change for you to be worthy of love or belonging or connection or taking up space in this world. You were created perfectly just the way you are. So the question becomes, if you were to look at yourself through the light, if you were to see yourself through the light, these things that you've been struggling with, would they still be as important? Would you still require them to change? Would they still need to look differently? Would those pounds still be as important? Would those skinny jeans that are on the shelf in the closet still matter? If you were to look at yourself through the eyes of the divine, if you were to see through the light, if you were to embrace the light and the spark that shines within you. I can look back on my life, and I can look back on all of the struggles that I've had, both in my former marriage and even afterwards, the struggles that I had within my body and within accepting myself the way I was. And there's always two voices. We have access to these two voices that are constantly, we've got the devil and the angel that sit on each shoulder. And you get to decide which one to listen to. You've got your resistance that's going to sit on one side, and it's going to talk to you about all of the things that are at stake, all of the things that you risk to lose if you weren't to change, if you weren't to drop the weight, or, get the money or put the money in the bank, or get the house, get the car, get the boat, whatever it is, all of the things that are at stake. They usually tie very much to our self-worth and how we see ourselves and our self-validation and our expressions of ourselves and who we are. And then on the other side, we have our higher self. So, the higher self is always going to be the voice of love and compassion. The ego, the resistance, it wants to keep you safe. It wants to keep you small and in your comfort zone, because anything outside of that comfort zone, no matter how bad your comfort zone may be, you could be in a very bad marriage or a very bad relationship. Your ego will always try to keep you confined to that situation, because within it, you are safe. And I know that safe might be a very relative term here, because you might be thinking, if I'm in a bad relationship, if I'm in a bad marriage, how am I actually safe by keeping myself contained within that? Well, the ego and our resistance works very much under the notion that anything that is different, any type of change is dangerous, even if it's positive change, because the unknown is scary, the unknown is dangerous. So it will always try to keep you contained. It will always try to keep you small. My ego very much tried to keep me within my marriage, and that's why I stayed for another 4 years, because I was listening to that voice within me that was saying, no, if you leave, you won't be worthy. You won't be worthy of finding love again. You won't be worthy of meeting anybody else. You'll never get married again. You'll never have a relationship again. This is it for you. This is as good as it's going to get. If you leave, you'll never find anybody again. You'll always be alone. Whereas the other side of the coin, the higher self, is the side or the voice of love and compassion. All it wants to do is to love on you. All it wants is for your expansion and your growth. It was the voice telling me that you are worthy of so much more than this. You are worthy of taking up so much more space. You are worthy of so much more love than you are receiving right now. And myself, I stuck very much for a long time in that resistance, because I had attached my self-worth to it. I attached it to my marriage. I attached it to my partner. I expected them to make me be worthy and to validate me. I expected the world to look at this beautiful life that I had created, the beautiful home and the gardens and all of these things that I had worked so hard for. I expected the world to look at that and to tell me that, yes, now I was worthy. Now I was worthy of being here and belonging and taking up space. Radical acceptance was radical just for that reason, because it went against all of it. It went against what the world was telling me I should want, what the world was telling me that I should look like, what the world was telling me was acceptable. And it was instead choosing to go inside, to go deeper and say, you know what? Everything that's in here is already good enough. Everything that I have inside me is already perfect the way that it is. There is nothing that I need to change. Sure, sometimes, we do want to lose weight or to get healthy. Sometimes we go down the wrong path. We detour ourselves, and sometimes we need to get back closer to who we are. And often we can mistake that for change, or we can mistake that for transformation when it's not actual growth. Often the journey of acceptance, the journey of growth and transformation isn't really growth or expansion at all. It's really a returning home. It's a returning home to ourselves, to who we are. It's going deeper and reconnecting with the light that we have within us, embracing that light, reconnecting with our wholeness and our holiness and our divinity. We spend so much of our time putting on all of these masks and these personas of who the world tells us we should be, and what we should look like, and what we should want, and what success looks like, and what love looks like, and what relationships should look like, that we put on all of these masks. And the journey of accepting ourselves, the journey of radical acceptance, is a journey of returning home. It's a journey of taking off all of those masks one by one, of peeling back all of the layers, of stripping down all of the layers of wallpaper off of the wall, so that we can return back to our center, and that we can choose to spend, the next moment, the next day, the next week, the next year, trying to be our authentic selves and constantly returning back home to who we are. That is the journey of radical acceptance. That is the journey of returning home. Those are the mechanics of it. So I want to recap, because I know that we've talked about a lot, in the past 45 minutes, and time is going by so quickly. But the three mechanics, I just want to summarize them again quickly for anybody who has, joined in late, and there will be replays available of this. But the three mechanics are: the first, understanding your resistance and sitting with it. Understanding what is your resistance telling you is at stake. What is it telling you that you are at risk of losing if you were not to change? If you were to accept yourself, your situation as it is right now, what is at risk? What would you lose? What would you be compromising? The second mechanic of radical acceptance is the mature side of acceptance. It is understanding that for us to change, for us to grow, for us to transform, for us to return back to ourselves, we need to acknowledge where we are, and we need to accept the reality of our current situation, whether it be our bodies, whether it be our relationships, our lives, whatever it may be. We need to accept the reality of where we are, so that from there we can start to bring in those small moments of what it is that we desire, whether it be self-love or health and wellness, whatever it is, looking for little moments of those throughout our day, throughout our journey, so that we can feel the way we want to feel when we get to the end of the road, when we get to the desired outcome or destination. That is the second mechanic, is acknowledging, accepting where we are, so that we can start to transform the journey and let the journey take us back to where we need to go, which is generally back to ourselves. And then the third mechanic is seeing the light, and seeing through the light, seeing through the eyes of the divine, seeing through the light or the eyes of our holiness and our divinity, and asking ourselves, if I were to see myself through the eyes of the universe, through the eyes of God, through the eyes of love, through the eyes of spirit, would this still be important? Would this still need to change? Would it still need to look differently than it does right now? And we'll find that often the answer to that question is no. Often the expectations that we have put upon ourselves are from our external world. They were put on us by our society, by our friends, by our family, by our communities, and we have chosen to take those on, and we have chosen to accept those as to what our reality should look like. So the third mechanic is really seeing through the light and trying to understand, are these really important? Do they really need to change? Do these really need to look differently? Those are the three mechanics of radical acceptance. I'm looking through the chats. I don't see any particular questions. So if anybody does have questions, we do have a few minutes for Q&A, or if there's anything that you're struggling with, I'm happy to support you with those on your journey. While we have some time here left together. But those are really, there's another passage in A Course in Miracles. It's lesson 79. It says, I recognize the problem so that it can be solved. And that is often where we are with regards to radical acceptance. We need to recognize the problem that is not that something needs to change. It is that we need to change the expectations that we have taken upon ourselves. We need to change the personas that we have taken on, the ideologies that we have taken on. Those are what need to change. It's not the numbers on the scale. It's not the size of the clothes. It is not the amount of money in the bank account. What needs to change is really the expectations that we have chosen to take on to ourselves and believe are true and will cause us to be worthy of love and belonging and taking up space, and instead go back deeper. So that's it. I wanna just take another moment to thank you for being here with me today, for sharing in this journey with me. Like I said, the book is available in hardcover. If you don't have a copy yet and you want to get the hardcover, it is available. The ebook is available on Kobo and Apple iBooks, as well as a few other retailers right now. It's currently making its way into all of them. So the ebook is available everywhere. If you don't have a copy of the book yet and you're looking for a digital format, the audiobook, which is narrated by myself, I don't think I mentioned that in the beginning. I narrated the audiobook. It will be available on Audible in the coming days and weeks. So just keep an eye out for that, and we'll keep you abreast of that situation. I see a comment has just come in. How do we make the distinction between something that we need to change versus something that needs to be accepted as is? That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that one. And again, it goes back to the two voices that we hear, right? So we have the voice of the ego, we have the voice of our resistance, and we have the voice of our higher self. What's really important, and it's something I talk about in the book as well, is taking moments for stillness, for self-reflection. it is very hard to tune into the voices that we have going on within us, to trying to understand what they are saying. If we don't take those moments of stillness to really tune into our bodies and tune into our mind and into our spirits to understand where those voices are coming from. If you're taking moments of stillness, of meditation, and you're listening to those voices and you're listening to what they're telling you, it becomes very obvious what needs to change versus what needs to be accepted as is. And it goes back to how they will be phrased, right? Our ego will always tell us that the ego will always side on the aspect of fear. The ego will always tell you about something that you risk to lose if you do not change, and that's how we know the difference. That's how we see the distinction of our ego versus our higher self. The ego will always tell you the risk. It will always tell you about what you will lose, about who will leave, who will walk away, what you will no longer be worthy of, what you will no longer be able to attain, versus the higher self, which will always talk to you about love, and it will talk to you about everything that there is to be gained by loving yourself and accepting yourself. It'll talk to you about expansion. It'll be soft. It'll be gentle. It'll be, the voice of compassion and empathy. That's the distinction between the two voices. And that's how we, when we take those moments to be still, to center into ourselves, it becomes very clear to us what needs to change and what just needs to be accepted as is. And again, when we take those moments, we are reconnecting to our whole self. We are reconnecting to our divinity, to our holiness. And it gives us that opportunity to, again, look at the situation through the light, to see it through the light, and to really get a new perspective on it and really understand, is this something that really needs to change? I can say for myself, over the past couple months, it's definitely been a struggle with my weight, like I talked about, of just not being able to exercise or care for myself in the way that I have in the past prior to the pandemic and, prior to parenthood and fatherhood. And there was very much that voice of fear within me of, if I don't change, my partner will leave me. If I don't lose the weight, I won't be worthy. I won't be attractive. I won't be able to, get on camera and do live talks and connect with people and, resonate with people and make those connections and do the work that I'm meant to do. But that was the voice of fear. That was the voice trying to keep me small, trying to keep me contained. Whereas my higher self, the loving voice, just wanted to love on it and say, those extra pounds, those are the evidence that you have spent the past year and a half caring for and nurturing a child, that you have spent, the past year and a half being selfless and taking care of others and putting your priorities into your family, putting your time and your energy into your family. And those pounds, they'll go away when they need to go away. That heaviness, that weight, you'll be able to discard it when it is no longer serving you, when you no longer need to be carrying it. But it is the distinction of the voice of fear versus the voice of love and compassion. And that's really where you start to understand what really needs to change and what doesn't, what really isn't important. So thank you for that. Thank you for that question. And I want to thank you all again for being here today and, taking time out of your Saturday to be here with us. And, I hope you get a copy of the book if you don't have one already. And I hope that it serves you, and that it helps you just awaken to who you truly are and to the beauty and the magnificence of who you truly are, because you are worthy. You are worthy of being here. You are worthy of taking up space. You are worthy of being loved, of feeling like you belong. You are magnificent just the way you are. And nothing will ever change that. And my prayer for you is that in these moments of darkness, in these moments of solitude, that you remember that and you keep returning back to yourself and back to the light and the beauty that lies within you. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here, everybody on Facebook, everybody on Instagram. Thank you for being here with me today. I truly appreciate it. With all of my heart, my deepest gratitude to you, my sincerest love. Just thank you. Thank you for being here.